Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Some of you guys love it. Let's do it. Paranormal Believers of Reddit. What's an event that made you believe? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was the night owl in my family growing up. My parents and siblings went to bed early, and I'd enjoy the sweet early 2000s internet in peace. One night, I was in my room late at night and saw my mom walk past my door. I got up to ask what she was doing, but when I looked down the hall where she had walked, all the lights were still off. I looked to my left where my parents' room was and could see her sound asleep in her bed. I'd had weird things happen before, but that was the first time I clearly saw something that couldn't have been there. My whole family had experiences seeing apparitions over the years at our house. Tall guy, pea coat-like jacket, one of those typical New York City type business people hats, standing against the doorway. Other times you see a shadow run across your basement. Another time I was in the basement. My brother asked if I was in my room upstairs. I wasn't, because there was someone sitting on my bed. Doors would close, lights would turn on and off. Never bothered us too much, but we named him Edward the Ghost. This was a new construction house, so there was no previous history other than being an empty field. Just a ton of small things that added up enough to go, I don't take them too seriously, but I do believe that intuition can be really powerful. Some of the more interesting ones. 1. Dreamed about my great-grandma saying goodbye when I was 13. I woke up to news the next morning she had passed away that night. 2. Was staying in an old castle as a kid and had a dream where I was a man waiting in line to be hung. I died in the dream and woke up. The next morning we got a tour of the castle and learned about the previous tenant of the room who died by hanging. His portrait looked just like the guy from the dream. 3. Both my dad and I saw the apparition in our basement. Learned about it years later when I made a joke about the ghost in our house, and he was like, "Wait, you too?" We compared sightings and had identical details: height, outfit, build, etc. My dad is incredibly analytical, so I was totally shocked. He thought he saw something. 4. Once perfectly guessed the number of jelly beans in a jar and won $100. After my grand died in Georgia, I kept finding pink feathers on me every day for months. I lived 3,000 miles away in California at the time. I had nothing around home or otherwise that had pink feathers on it. She always loved the color pink, so it was just oddly comforting after a while. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I sure do miss seeing those pink feathers. I am not a believer, but I once saw an apparition of a man in a red shirt walking in my closed-in backyard, but only for an instant. I just shook my head without saying a word, and then my 3-year-old, who was sitting beside me, asked, "Who was that man in the red shirt?" So, no, I'm not superstitious enough to believe in ghosts, except for that one. That was real. Well, I don't know if superstition has anything to do with the belief in ghosts or the supernatural, but, I understand it. My father ran a photography studio from 1975 to 2005. He closed when digital took over, meant he couldn't compete with hobbyists. He also owned colored labs and other photography-related businesses. This would have been in the 90s, but he was photographing a wedding at a rural limestone Catholic church in a small town in Kansas. The bride and her mother prayed that her grandmother, who had passed away, would be there. He photographed the wedding and sent the unedited proofs to the family for them to build and design their wedding album. The family called him back and wanted to know about a series of 4 to 5 images taken that show an apparition standing next to the couple as they knelt at the altar. It was of a woman dressed in a full-length white dress and her face veiled. Her dress covered her feet, but her hands here at her side. She was turned 45 degrees and facing both the kneeling couple and toward the priests officiating. A candle behind her illuminated one side of her body more than the other. Clear as day. It was in a few images. He checked the negatives, and the personage was in the negatives as well. There was nobody at the wedding dressed like that, and nobody standing next to the bride and groom at the altar. The family took it as a miracle. My father died in 2011, and we talked about this the day or two before he passed away. He had no explanation for it. It was done in film, and 10 years before he even started getting into digital work, and even so, he never learned digital photography to the level needed to do this. I asked him about double exposures or other film techniques, but all his tricks would have been in posed half and image over another, not insert a white dressed woman into an image with the depth to show her standing next to the altar and participating in the ceremony. To the day he died, he had no explanation of these images. I asked him about it on his deathbed, and it was one of our last conversations. They are at my mom's house, and I want to try to digitize them. Maybe send them to a skeptic sub and see what other explanations there may be. However, to this day, I believe that the grandmother was there standing beside the altar. I don't know what that means as far as what happens to us after we die, but at a minimum, it meant the family relations extend beyond the grave. I mean, when I lived with my folks in the basement, we'd have some funky stuff happen from time to time. My CD player would turn on and start spinning a CD, even though it was unplugged and the battery area was empty. TV would change channels or volume, and stuff would move around at random. Never when you were looking at it, though. We'd leave my room, play in the adjoining kids' room, go back into the room to grab something, and my toys might have rearranged slightly. But the one that got me was after a stupid ghost tour in Victoria, British Columbia. Went to what had been a brothel back in the gold rush days, where at one point, when they'd torn up the floors to renovate, they found the remains of like 10 women. Felt weird all the way to the hotel, went to bed and woke up at like 4 in the morning. For some reason, started thinking about the nasty bouncer they'd been telling us about, and then for some reason started thinking, oh, but he didn't mean to hurt those girls. He must be just really misunderstood. He's not a bad guy. Then, after a wait a minute, what the F moment, opened my eyes and there's this dark, shadowy shape like 6 feet tall wearing a bowler hat just staring at me. I locked my eyes on the bastard for like a solid 10 minutes, just frozen. The light in the room was increasing because it was late summer and dawn was on its way, and the shape never lost its definition, nor did it move. Then, I bolted and shook my partner awake, and the second I looked away, he vanished. Could it have been sleep paralysis? Sure. Never experienced it before or in the 12 years since, though. I worked at a nursing home in Ames, Iowa, another CNA, an extremely experienced aide who had been in role for like 30 years, and I were doing overnight rounds. We opened the door to a resident's room and saw white dress shoes and white pants that faded into nothing as you looked up. The aide shrieked and ran, and I just closed the door. I eventually coaxed her back to finish rounds, but after that shift, she never came back. 30 years and just walked away. Lots of other stories from that job. I don't want to say what ghosts are, but I think they're real. When I saw my great-grandmother standing in a doorway when I was 13, it was ass F o'clock in the morning. She lived at least 20 or so miles away, and she'd been dead for at least a week. She didn't have any eyes, and she didn't look happy, despite the fact that I only ever saw her angry once. Anytime I see anything clearly enough to make out details, they're always missing their eyes, and they always seem unusually serious. Not totally story related, but does anyone else use that terminology? I do all the time when he said ass F o'clock. When I lived in a haunted house, I've always been interested in paranormal stuff, and I had experiences that I couldn't quite explain, but I still considered myself a skeptic. That is until I moved into this one house. I'm not really a spiritual person or somebody that gets vibes from places, but this place just felt evil. Here's just a few of the incidents. I had a sleep paralysis episode where I hallucinated a little boy outside my window. The next day, my mom told me about a dream she had had where a little boy was staring at me through the same window. Another time, I was up late in the middle of summer. We didn't have air conditioning, so my window was wide open. Outside my window was a small stoop with a lawn chair on it. Suddenly, I heard the lawn chair scrape across the stoop, like someone was throwing it out of the way to get to my window. I legit thought I was about to effing die. Then, my window started violently rattling, like someone was shaking it. The only way to get to make that sound I tested it the next day, was to shake it from inside my room. The absolute worst thing about that house was a noise that would only happen when I laid my head down at night. There was a sound from inside the wall right about where I put my head down to sleep. This is the same wall that the rattling window was on, by the way. It's a difficult noise to describe because I haven't really heard anything like it before or since. I've heard rodents in walls and stuff like that, and this noise wasn't that. The closest comparison I can think of is a rain stick, but more like scraping. It only happened when I laid down to sleep. I could be in my room all night and not hear it, but the second my head hit that pillow, the sound would start. At first, I thought it was the wind blowing this vine that was growing near the outside of the wall. It must have been making it scrape against the house, and the timing was just a coincidence. That thought calmed me down a little until I heard it super loud one night and looked out to see that there was no wind whatsoever. I'm not exaggerating. The air was completely still. It got so bad I started sleeping on the couch and didn't sleep in my bed again until I moved out. The noise itself was freaky, but the thing that still bothers me to this day was the timing of it. It's not like I went to bed at the exact same time every night. Sometimes I'd go to bed at 10, sometimes not until 2. But I never heard the noise until I laid down, and only if I lay down to sleep, not if I just laid down to play with my phone or something. It's like whatever was making the noise knew what I was doing and wanted to F with me. I have more stories, but it's late and I'm starting to freak myself out. I had always believed a bit, but my personal experiences have been weird, mostly poltergeist activity, which has happened at 2 of 3 houses. But one night, I had a disturbing episode of sleep paralysis. I'd experienced it before and after, but luckily I don't have visual hallucinations, except for this time. I was in bed, frozen, when a woman crawled onto me. She had beige, leathery skin, and instead of legs, she had 6 arms arranged like an insect. She hovered over my face and breathed, her gray teeth showing through a lipless mouth and strings of dirty hair. And then I woke up, terrified, but thinking it was just weird sleep paralysis stuff. Then I smelled urine, really strong, like a bucket of it was just up to my nose. Ugh. I thought I'd pissed myself in fear, but I checked, and no, nothing. The smell left quickly, but the whole incident left me scared in a way no bad dream could. My theory is some kind of minor demon, fae, or whatever that travels around, inducing nightmares to feed on fear. One day a long time ago when I was little, I had this imaginary friend named Elvis, and my grandmother, I'm going to call her Nana for the story, she started asking me about how we looked. I described Elvis Presley exactly. This imaginary friend sung me to sleep. He had a dead twin brother, and one day apparently, he told me that soon my Nana was going to die. I told my Nana this, and 2 months later, guess who died? My Nana. A week after my Nana died, this imaginary friend disappeared forever. 57 missing days of my childhood. I remember some, but not a lot. My mother reported me missing immediately after she couldn't find me. Kinda disappeared after I laid down for a nap. I woke up in my room again, and it was Christmas 2003. Mom asked me where I had been, crying of course, and police and counseling, all for me to apparently tell me about Zookland. I don't remember much more other than it was a very nice place. Other kids were there, and I think about the one kid who played with me a lot. Have a weird burn mark on my arm from when I was there. Brown spot about a quarter of an inch with a white dot in the center of my right forearm. It was nice there. Can someone help me here? I feel like this is either an inside joke that I'm too old to understand, or maybe this poster had some grammatical errors. What did I just read? This one is a bit weird and may not be believed, or it was my parents, but they swear they didn't do it. My bedroom had big sliding wardrobe doors we used for storage, Christmas tree in a box, clothes, clutter, boxes of old stuff, that kind of thing. I remember after my grandfather died, I got upset when I realized I couldn't remember his voice. I had this weird thing where if I was having a hard time, I would wake up in a spare bedroom, which used to be my bedroom when I was little. I'd sleepwalk and go to the bed in the next room. That night, I was half sleeping, half awake, with my back to the door in the spare bedroom, and everything was quiet. Then the hairs on the back of my neck and arms went up, and I froze. Not quite in fear, but knowing something was happening. It was like the air changed. Then I heard my granddad's voice saying, "It's only me, you daft bugger." Something he would say when he was with us. His voice was cheerful, like he was smiling when he said it. Then the unsettling feeling stopped, and I fell asleep. My mom woke me up in the morning, knowing if I was in the spare room, something was bothering me. When she walked in, Granddad's old walking stick was propped up against the wall near my bed. The walking stick had been buried among the other clutter in the other bedroom wardrobe, right at the back, and she'd have to had taken everything out to get it, and she swears she didn't. This may be a coincidence, could have been my parents or my mind playing tricks on me because I missed his voice, but either way, I needed to hear him, and whatever happened that night, I was grateful because I got to hear him again. I remember sometimes going to sleep in there, again, half hoping I would hear him again, but it never happened. Sounds like bullshit, but I really needed to hear him, and I did somehow. Never experienced anything like that since.